I cannot wait to have this conversation with you. There was a time when being a pastor meant something culturally. And maybe it's been a long time, but you probably remember when this was true. You, as a kid or a young adult, you looked at pastors and thought there was something about them that you respected, that deserved, not in a weird way, but it deserved a little bit of honor. And this may have been true for you. Maybe there was a time when you were a pastor and it meant something community culturally. Like if you stood up to preach, people assumed you had done some hard work and that you had something important to say. They assumed that you brought wisdom. They assumed that you had credibility. And authority back in this time, right? Authority kind of just came with the title, it came with the office of pastor. And guess what? That world is gone. But you don't need me to tell you that. People no longer assume experts of any kind are wise. In fact, they assume now, people in general assume that experts are biased, that experts have an agenda, that experts are, protecting a system or protecting a ministry or an organization. And listen, the shift that we've experienced here in culture, it's affecting lots of people, not just pastors. It affects doctors and teachers and journalists. And it definitely affects pastors. It affects anybody that used to be seen as an expert. And if you don't adjust to this shift, leadership becomes so heavy. And not just more heavy than it should, it almost becomes so heavy that you can't lead anymore. And you'll get way less accomplished than you ever thought possible, or certainly more less than you ever wanted to do. So there's a very important distinction that we should chat about in this conversation. The truth, right, didn't change. People like you who are pastors, you are an expert in lots of things, probably. You're probably an expert in overall theology, Old Testament, New Testament history, exegesis, hermeneutics. I mean, you have incredible wisdom. You have spent time in counseling for yourself, hopefully, but also with others. I mean, you have learned so much. God has placed you in a position with wisdom, with a calling for a reason. And you have truths that can change people's lives. And those truths have not changed, but something has changed. And what changed is trust. Trust is what has changed. So, what does that mean, kind of structurally, for you as a church leader? I'll tell you what I think it means. It means that influence no longer flows through expertise. Influence now flows from trust. Let me say that again. This is a really important idea for us in leadership, okay? Influence used to flow from expertise. You were a doctor, you were automatically granted influence as a leader because you had expertise. You were an attorney, you were a politician. I mean, think about how much that has shifted, right? You were a pastor. Your expertise gave you influence, but now no one respects experts because honestly, no one thinks that there are experts because they read the social media post. They sat down on Facebook for 30 minutes. Now they're an expert, right? And the echo chamber is killing expert culture. So what this means is expertise now flows from trust. Think about this. If trust is high, leadership and mission and vision direction moves quickly. If trust is low, everything slows down to a crawl. When trust is high, correction can feel productive. But when trust is low, correction feels intrusive or abusive. If trust is high, vision feels safe and healthy. But when trust is low, you know what it just feels ambitious. It just feels like words. And in this situation we have found ourselves, this cultural moment, most pastors respond to this resistance by sharpening things like sermons. When you think about sharpening something, right? We sharpen it so we can cut more deeply, cut more harmfully, right? Cut more violently. And so what we do is we feel this resistance from people, and we know that we are sitting on truth and that we actually are experts. But when we feel the resistance from the crowd, we begin to sharpen because we think that is the answer, to be more expert. But that isn't what people need. The resistance is often not a preaching issue. As we said earlier, it's really a trust equity issue. If trust really is our opportunity, and by the way, it is the issue, let's dig into trust for a moment. If trust is the one thing that gains us influence today, it should be our goal as leaders, in the church especially, to do everything we can to gain trust. Because trust is what will allow the truth to come through and then hit the hearts and souls of people. So when you think about trust, trust lives kind of at an intersection. There are two things that are required for trust. It's character and competency. When you look at any leader, again, church or not, it doesn't matter. We're going to talk about it in the church. But when you look at any leader, trust lives at the intersection of character and competency. Now, let's each one really quick. Character. Character answers things like, do you care about me? Other people? Are your motives clean? Okay, so character is all about who you really are and why you're really doing this. Character, people with high character care about others more than themselves. People with high character don't have selfish motives for their leadership behaviors, right? So a high character person, right, is focused on others. Now, competency. Competency also is required. Competency answers questions like, can you actually help me? Do you know what you're doing? Those are really important. A person who is seen as a leader, who is trusted with influence, has high competency. They can actually help people. They know what they're doing. They're not faking it until they can make it. So when you think about these two things, if people believe that you care, but they question your capability, here's what they're going to do. They're going to feel warm about you, but they're not going to have confidence in your leadership. So guess what? They're not going to trust you. A lot of people fall into this category. In fact, I have found, and this is maybe not necessarily true of you, but I have found a lot of pastors live in this space. People typically go into ministry because they do deeply care about God, about others. And people who care are drawn to more caring professions. So when you think about pastors, pastors often care deeply. Yet sometimes the capability or the competency for the role is lacking at times. Again, not with everybody, but this is true in a lot of different situations. So if you were to bump into a pastor, a lead pastor, a leader who cares deeply, but struggles a little bit with the competency of the job, the people around them and the people in their church are going to feel a healthy relational warmth toward this person, but they're not going to allow them to have influence over them because they don't really have the capability, the confidence for that. Now, on the other hand, we have a lot of people in the business community that are the opposite. You know, if a person is high competency, they're extremely capable, but if people question their motive, question their care, here's what happens in that case. People will respect their ability, but they're going to hold back from giving them influence because you can't trust that leader that they have your best intentions in mind. You can't trust that that leader cares more about you than they care about themselves. So they become questionable. So to be an influential leader, you need both. You have to have high care and high competency. And I don't want to make this more complex, but here's kind of where it gets complex. The people who are in your church, again, we're focusing on leaders in the church right now. The people who are in the church, they already trust other people who they believe are high in care and competency. Now, they may not be, but they believe they are. For instance, people are being discipled because they trust cable news commentators who explain whatever they would call the news. They trust the Instagram influencer who can name their frustration. They trust the podcast voice that sounds consistent and extremely confident. They have given influence to these people. Why? Because they believe that they are high in care and high in competency, whether they actually are or not. And unfortunately, in these cases, fortunately for us, when we get it right, trust compounds over time. So if your voice appears, I mean, think about this. If your voice appears once a week in a person's heart and life, and other voices are appearing daily, I mean, where does that leave people? It really gives influence to a lot of other places outside of the local church, outside of you. And this is not about kind of competing for attention. I mean, we're probably never going to win the attention battle, but it is about recognizing that discipleship is happening whether you are designing it or not. So here's the move for you to consider. And I would love to say within the next 30 days, I'd love for you to schedule a leadership meeting around one question. And here's the question: where might we be unintentionally eroding trust? If trust is the thing that gives you influence, and influence matters because nobody is giving it to you automatically, no one assumes that you can be trusted. So if trust is the linchpin for leadership today, how are you gaining it or unintentionally eroding it? And then do something difficult. I don't want you to defend what you hear. I just want you to listen. I want you to look for inconsistencies. Inconsistencies are the greatest eroders of trust. And by the way, it could be inconsistencies in how you care or inconsistencies in your capability, your competency. So for instance, are standards drifting? If you used to have a standard of excellence, for instance, and now that standard has been reduced some, guess what? That is a competency drift, and it is eroding trust. Are decisions being communicated late or not at all? That's a competency problem, and it could bleed into a character problem. Are next steps muddy or unclear? Is feedback filtered? This is a great one. People with high character welcome feedback because they care about you more than them. And they know that them growing as a leader through your feedback is going to help them lead people like you better. But people who are maybe more insecure, right? People who don't want to receive that feedback, they're not open-handed with it. Well, it's a character issue. And therefore, it's an erosion of trust complication. I mean, come on. You know this. Trust can collapse in one dramatic moment. And we see that happen in church way too frequently. But in most cases, that isn't how trust is lost. In most cases, trust erodes quietly over time through inconsistency. So I'd love for you to just choose maybe just one structural adjustment that you can make. And it could just be something as simple as clarifying one next step, that they just haven't been clear about, or maybe addressing one inconsistent standard. Maybe you've been holding one person to a standard and other people to different standards. Maybe you just normalize that. That's a character conversation and a competency issue. Maybe you just initiate one honest feedback conversation where you go first and you ask for honest feedback with high care, high competency. And when you get it, you don't become defensive. There is no retribution at all. You just listen because you want to become better for their benefit. Or maybe you just communicate a decision earlier than typical. So many times leaders lose trust because they are indecisive, or they are decisive, yet they don't communicate the decisions, or they make a decision and a week later they change it and make another decision. You can understand how the people who are looking to you as a leader can lose their trust in you because those kinds of behaviors lose influence over them. But small, visible consistency also compounds. Small inconsistencies compound and erode the wrong way, but small, visible consistency compounds trust. So, expert culture is definitely fading. However, trust culture is rising. And when trust rises as a leader, pressure really, really drops.